Regulation within TEFL Tourism, I've raised in the book as a major concern, actually. There seems to be very little regulation at all. Granted, it is difficult because it is a global industry, and you've got cultural differences, you've got geographical differences, you've got differences in education systems. All of those factors come into play there. There is very little regulation. So when people sign up for example, a TEFL qualification, they could do that online in as little as 20 hours, or they could have done a year-long course at an established university. And on their CV, it will say TEFL qualification. So from an employer's perspective, or from sort of a government's perspective who are issuing visas, etc., it's very difficult to determine actually what kind of qualification they have. It's not only about the qualifications that lack regulation and standardisation, but there's also the practices. What is a teacher? What is a teacher to us here in the UK is not necessarily the same as what is a teacher in many parts of the world, because what a teacher does and their actual duties and responsibilities differs in many different contexts. So that's very ambiguous and very unclear. And that's a problem not only from the prospective teacher's case, and I have seen examples of people who have signed up to be a TEFL teacher. They've flown out to a destination and perhaps there's been corporal punishment there. And they felt very uncomfortable with that because the country where they are from, that's not acceptable. But there's cultural differences and they haven't been pre-warned about this and they're not aware of this. So there are many differences like that that play a key role in actually, is the industry going to be successful? Is that person going to want to stay as a TEFL teacher? And a lot of people don't really know exactly what they're signing up for. Likewise, there are the TEFL teachers, the people who are hiring TEFL teachers. So that's the prospective employers, or perhaps the universities who are offering them courses on teacher training placements on their return home. They have a different perception of what their teaching experience perhaps was than what it was in reality. There are also aspects such as monitoring who are being employed. So I've seen many concerns, and I raise this in the book, about people being employed inappropriately. There are two main areas that have arisen in that region. The first is in terms of skills. Are they suitably qualified? I've spoken to TEFL teachers who have said to me, I can't spell to save my life, but I'm teaching English, it's crazy. There are people who they might have a degree, but it's in nothing to do with English. They don't have a GCSE in English or equivalent, are they suitably qualified to actually be teaching a language that they're perhaps they don't specialise in themselves? And so there's a strong argument to say, should these be TEFL teachers in the first place? It's a difficult one because in many cases actually governments are trying to boost their levels of English. It's part of their development agenda, but they can't recruit enough teachers, which is why they turn to tourists. But then the question is, are the tourists often suitably qualified to do that? And if they're not, actually the students might not be making the progress that's intended. So the intended outcomes might not be achieved. And that's certainly something that warrants additional investigation. And that's something that the book does highlight, is that actually there's a lot of gaps in knowledge and there's a lot of areas that haven't been looked into sufficiently to date. The other area in terms of skill, in terms of which teachers are recruited, that has been raised as a concern and that I do address in the book, is monitoring who's employed and looking at their background and their credentials. So many destinations won't have any kind of background checks. In the UK, for example, we're very hot on that. We have the DBS checks, they'll check references, etc. Many destinations won't do this. So there have been concerns that the industry could attract people who might act inappropriately, paedophiles, that sort of thing. There have been examples within orphanage tourism of a lot of sex tourism taking place and a lot of abuse happening there, particularly in certain parts of the world. Cambodia's the one that's been highlighted there in the media a lot. So there is a risk that within TEFL Tourism there could be a similar approach taken. So there is a very strong argument to say that there should be certain background checks in place, but actually at the moment there is no regulation for that, certainly nothing that's standardised. So that is another big concern and something that definitely needs to be addressed on a global, if not a local scale.